It pays to remember names and faces. Two men approached each other on the street with a look of recognition in their eyes. One said to the other, "Now wait a minute. Don't tell me. I know you. I know you. But I'm not sure of where we met. Let me see if I can think of your name. I've got it. We met in Miami Beach 2 years ago." "No, I've never been to Miami Beach." "Hold it. Don't tell me." "Oh, yes. It was on the boardwalk of Atlantic City that we met." "Sorry, I've never visited Atlantic City." "I've got it now. Chicago in 1953. "Nope, I was not in Chicago in 1953. "Well, I know we've met. Where do I know you from?" "Idiot, I'm your brother." "Oh, I know your face, but I can't remember your name. Although I doubt it. I doubt if any of you are as bad as the fellow in the anecdote. However, often have you been embarrassed because you had to say this? I'm sure it has happened to you many times. If I were to take a poll as to why most people want to take my memory course, I think it would show that at least 80% want to because they can't seem to be able to remember names and faces. Usually, of course, it is the name that has been forgotten, not the face. The reason for this is quite simple. You see, most of us are what we call eye-minded. In other words, things that we see register upon our brains with much more emphasis than what we hear. You always see the face, but usually only hear the person's name. That's why most of us, time after time, have to say, "I recognize your face, but I can't remember your name." Not only can this be embarrassing, but can sometimes hurt in business and ultimately cost you money. Some people try to avoid this embarrassment by trying to trick people into giving their name before they themselves realize that their name has been forgotten. This might work occasionally, but not usually. And it still pays to remember the names. I'm sure you have all heard the old story about the man who met a business acquaintance whose name he couldn't recall, tried to avoid embarrassment by pretending he knew the name, but wasn't sure of the spelling. So he asked, "How do you spell your name again?" The reply was the only way it can be spelled, Jones. You see, this trick didn't work in this particular case. Another sneaky way of pretending you didn't forget the name of someone you should have remembered is this. Merely ask the person what his name is. If he tells you his second name, you say, "Oh, I wouldn't forget that. It's your first name I meant." If the person tells you the first name first, you of course say that you knew that, but it was the second name you wanted. In this way, you get the person's full name, and it seems as if you only forgot one of the names. There is only one thing wrong with this bit of hocus pocus. If the person gives you his full name as you asked for the name in the first place, you're out of luck. Then there is the classic example of the fellow who always asks people whose names he has forgotten, whether they spelled it with an E or an I. This was fine until he tried it with Miss Hill. No, I'm afraid it still pays to remember the name. Instead of resorting to trickery, not only does it pay to remember it, but believe me, it's easier than resorting to subterfuge because it takes much less effort. People have tried various systems and methods to help their memory. For names, some use the alphabet or first initial method. That is to say, they make a tremendous effort to retain only the initial of the person's name. This is more wasted effort, since they usually forget the initial anyway. And even if they remember the initial, how can that tell them the person's name? If you address Mr. Adler as Mr. Armenian, or vice versa, he isn't going to be pleased just because the name you call him has the first letter of his name. Although writing things down on paper can sometimes be helpful in remembering, it cannot be depended upon as far as memorizing names is concerned. In conjunction with a good system of association, perhaps, as I will explain later, but not by itself. If you were able to draw an exact replica of a person's face, this would be better since you would then know which name belongs to which face. you would have your own two tangible with which make some sort of ridiculous association. But unfortunately, most of us can't draw that well. And if we could, it wouldn't be that helpful. That it would make up for the time it would take. Some memory teachers will tell their students to keep a memory book and write down the name of every person they want to remember. As I've said, this might help a little if used together with a good system of association, but not otherwise. It might help some, of course, if you wanted to run down the list of names each time you meet a person, which the hope with the hope that the name will come to mind when you see it written in your book. If it did, I don't think you would feed the ego of the person whose name you finished out of a book instead of your memory. It's it isn't necessary, I'm sure, for me to tell you how important it is to remember names and faces. Yet here is one of the most common memory complaints of modern times. I just can't remember names. Or our way of life today makes it almost unavoidable to meet many new people every day. You meet people continually, people you want to remember, and people that you do not think are important enough to bother remembering until you meet them again. Then, when it is too late, you realize that you should have tried to remember. Would it not be an asset for any salesman to remember the names of his customers? Or for a doctor to remember the names of his patients, a lawyer, his clients, etc.? Of course it would. Everybody wants to be able to remember names and faces. But many times an important sale is nipped in the bud. Money is lost, someone is caused to be embarrassed, or a reputation is stained because someone forgot an important person's name. Yet even as far back as early Greek and Roman civilizations, Cicero remembered the names of thousands of his villagers and soldiers using a memory system. There is a young lady that I've heard of who is the hat check girl in a popular New York nightclub. She gained a reputation because she never issued a check for your hat or coat. She simply remembered which hat or which coat belongs to whom. It is said that she never yet high school anyone. The Rob article. This may not seem so important to you, since it would be just as easy to do it with a hat or a coat checks, the way all check room attendants do it. But this young lady has made herself into sort of an attraction at this nightclub, and she has a sizable tips proof, and her sizable tips prove it, of course. This is not exactly remembering names and faces, since she doesn't remember the names, but it is similar enough. She must associate the hat or coat, or both, to the person's face. I've been told that Delboy, tell that the bellboy of a large hotel down south has gained a similar reputation whenever someone checks into the hotel that has been there even once before. This bellboy addresses them by name. The last I heard, he is well on his way to saving enough money out of his tips to buy the hotel. This should prove to you, if proof were necessary, that people love to be remembered. They even pay for it. This particular hat check, girly bellboy, surely made more money than the others who work the same job. A person's name is his most prized possession, and there is nothing more pleasing to him than hearing his own name or having it remembered by others. Some of my students and myself have remembered as many as 300 names and faces at one meeting, and you can do it too. Before getting into the actual system of methods for remembering names and faces, I'd show you how you can improve your memory for them by at least 25% to 50%. Without the system, read the next few paragraphs very carefully. The main reason that most people forget a name is because they never remembered it in the first place. I'll take that a step further and say that they never even been introduced to someone new. Something like this, something like this, Mr. Reader. Meet Mr. Straffis. All you hear is a mumbled sound instead of the name, possibly because the person who is doing the introducing doesn't remember the name himself, so he resorts to double talking. You, on the other hand, probably feel that you will never meet this person again, so you say, "Nice to meet you," and you never bother to get the name right. You may even spend some time talking to the person and finally say goodbye and still not hear the name properly. The only thought most people will give to this situation is self-questioning. Gosh, what was the person's name? That gentleman. That nice gentleman I spoke to the other day. When no answer is forthcoming, the entire thing is shrugged off with an, oh well, and that's that. This is how people find themselves talking to others and addressing them as buddy, old pal, fella, sweetheart, honey. Anything you can think of to keep from finding it necessary to use the person's name. Well, you squirm with embarrassment because you don't know the name. Oliver Herford put it this way. When he gave his definition of the word darling, the popular form to address and speaking to a person of the opposite sex whose name you cannot at the moment recall, here then is your first rule for remembering names. Be sure you hear the name in the first place. As I said before, you see the face, so the odds are you'll recognize it when you see it again. You can only hear the name, so get it right. I have yet to hear someone complain, I know your name, but I can't seem to remember your face. It is always the name that creates the problem. So to repeat, be sure that you hear the name. Don't let the fellow that's doing the introduction get away with double talk. If you haven't heard the name, if you're not absolutely sure of it, ask him to repeat it. Sometimes, even after hearing a name, you may not be sure of the pronunciation. If that's the case, ask the person to spell it for you, or try to spell it yourself. He'll correct you if you spell it incorrectly, and he'll be flattered by your interest in his name. Incidentally, if you make a habit of trying to spell the name of every new person you meet, you'll soon become accustomed to the spelling of most any kind of name. You'll be surprised as to how many of them you'll spell correctly. Eventually, you will be able to recognize how certain sounds are spelled for certain nationalities. You'll hear that the Italian language has no letter J, so the J sound in an Italian name is always spelled with a G, or the soft G sound, and sometimes the sh sound. In a Polish name is usually spelled with x. Well, the sound I is sometimes spelled with the letter ag. The ch or ds sound in an Italian name is sometimes spelled with a double C. The sh sound in a German name, particularly at the beginning of the name, is usually spelled with a sh, etc. Of course, it doesn't always work. I recently came across a name that sounded like Burke, but spelled work. However, many of the people who have seen my performance will vouch for the fact that I spell their names correctly almost 85% of the time, or closely enough to impress them. Anyway, so you see, it can be done. I mention this because spelling a person's name correctly or almost correctly will impress them almost as much as remembering it. If after making sure of the spelling you realize that the name is the same or similar to that of a friend, a relative of yours, mention that fact. This all serves to impress the name on your mind. If it is an odd name, one that you have never heard before, say so. Don't feel shy or say if you're imposing when you do these things, because everybody is flattered when you make a fuss over their names, just as they would be if you showed an interest in any of their prized possessions or in any of their particular interests. This is, I suppose, can be put down to human nature. While talking to the person, repeat his name as often as you can. In the course of the conversation, don't keep jabbering it like an idiot. Of course, just use it whenever you feel it is appropriate and necessary. I'm not mentioning this to be facetious. I've read some memory experts' instructions on this point, and they have given a sample conversation. Why, yes, Mr. Green Pepper, I do sail to Europe every season, Mr. Green Pepper. And oh, Mr. Green Pepper, don't you just adore Rome, Mr. Green Pepper? Mr. Green Pepper, tell me this, etc., etc., and so on, into the night. This will not impress Mr. Green Pepper. It will scare him out of his wits. No, just use it, as I said, whenever you feel it fits. You use the name when you say goodbye or good night. Don't just say something about hoping to meet again. Say goodbye, Mr. Johnson. I hope we'll meet again soon, etc. All this will etch the name more firmly and definitely into your mind. The only effort involved here is, as usual, is just in doing this the first few times. After that, it will become a habit. You don't even realize that you are doing it. Make up your mind to follow the hints suggested in the last few paragraphs. Read them over if you feel you're not sure of them. For some people, all this in itself comprises a system for remembering names is simply because by following the above hints and suggestions, You make names interesting. You act interested, and in so doing, you actually create interest. And interest, as I've explained, in a large part of memory. And interest, as I explained, is a large part of memory. All of the above will help your memory for names and faces by 25% to 50%. If you apply yourself, but keep reading, and I'll help you take care of the remaining 55% to 75%.